I was halfway through drilling a hammock hook into the old pine when she showed up again, not even knocking this time, just striding through the edge of my property like she owned the lake, the air, and maybe even the damn trees. Her sunglasses were too big for her face, her clipboard too heavy for the way she flung it forward like a legal sword, and her smile, well, that smile was the kind you only see on people who are about to ruin your weekend. I should have known then that this wasn't going to be another petty HOA squabble about fence height or dock permits. No, this time she was aiming higher. Literally. She pointed at the treehouse I built myself over 6 months with the help of my late brother's old blueprints, and a lot of elbow grease, and said, "You'll be vacating this for the weekend. My guests will be arriving Friday night. They'll need it." At first, I actually laughed. Not a chuckle, but a solid chest-deep laugh that startled a crow out of the nearby spruce. I thought she was joking. Maybe confused. Maybe drunk on her own HOA authority. But her eyes didn't flinch, and that was the moment I realized we'd crossed into entirely new territory. This wasn't about policy. This was personal. The treehouse had always been more than just a project. It sat 30 feet up, overlooking the still, silver surface of the lake like some kind of rustic observatory for peace and stubbornness. I didn't build it for fun. I built it after the last wildfire took the old cabin. I built it as a way to start over. And now here she was, Barbara Hutchins, HOA president, power-hungry, passive-aggressive, and possessed by whatever unspoken rule gave her the confidence to demand it like a rental. I asked her, flatly, what on earth made her think that was going to happen. She cleared her throat and clicked her pen like it was a gavel. Clause 14C, she said. Under temporary hosting rights, emergency reallocation of recreational facilities may be enforced by the board. I blinked. I stared. I asked if she had even read the clause, because the treehouse wasn't a communal facility. It wasn't listed anywhere on HOA documents. It was mine, built on my land, and connected to my dock, not theirs. You'll find that land lines are blurry when a structure affects the visual harmony of the shared lakeside, she said, as if she'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. I told her no, very simply. Not loudly. Not rudely. Just no. And that was the first crack in her mask. Her polite smile faltered. Her fingers tapped the clipboard a little too hard. You'll regret this, she said, turning like a villain in a local theater play. I doubt it, I muttered, walking back up the steps toward the trapdoor. The trapdoor I had sealed with a marine-grade padlock for nights just like this, nights where silence and elevation mattered more than anything. It wasn't even a day later when the guests arrived anyway. 5 cars. 2 golf carts. A truck full of coolers. They came down the lake road in a slow, honking parade, as if showing off their arrival would give it legitimacy. They parked half on HOA land, half across my grass, like the whole shore was some kind of open-air festival site. I was halfway through calling a friend at the sheriff's office when I saw her standing at the bottom of the treehouse ladder again. This time, she wasn't alone. There were guests with foldable champagne flutes and Bluetooth speakers. One of them had already kicked off his loafers like he was at a beach resort. I told them all to leave. I gave them 10 minutes. Barbara told me I was making a scene. You think this is a treehouse, she said, but it's an opportunity for the community. I told her this community could go rent a cabin. She dialed her phone without another word. The cops arrived 12 minutes later. 2 SUVs. Flashing blue lights bounced off the lake and turned the water into a surreal disco of legal misunderstanding. Officer Darnell stepped out, already rubbing the bridge of his nose like he knew this was going to be one of those calls. Let me guess, he said. Barbara again? I nodded. He sighed, then turned toward her. She had a binder now. An actual full binder. She claimed I had violated the shared aesthetic integrity of the upper lakefront. That I was impeding guests' use of a visual asset. That I was a disruption to the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. I waited quietly until she was done, then handed him my deed. It had clear, highlighted boundaries. The treehouse sat entirely inside it. The dock too. The path. Even the tree it was built on. Darnell took a long look, then asked Barbara if she had mistaken a private structure for a common space. The board has discretion, she said a little too quickly. But not jurisdiction, Darnell replied. I thought that would be the end. That maybe she'd retreat with what little dignity remained and go back to policing lawn flamingos and unauthorized holiday lights. But Barbara wasn't built like that. She didn't just want power. She needed to win. And when people like her realize they're wrong, they don't back down. They double down. So when the officers left, when the guests were shooed off like confused pigeons, and when the sun went down over a lake that was finally quiet again, I knew she wasn't finished. I could feel it. There was a storm building, and it wasn't the summer one on the radar. It was her. That night, I sat on the trapdoor with a cup of tea and a pair of binoculars. I watched her porch across the lake light up like a war room. People coming in. Leaving. Papers passing through hands. Laptops open on the patio. It looked less like a community board and more like a political campaign in full swing. The thing is, I had dealt with a dozen HOA disagreements in my time. Flags, fencing, boat trailers. But this wasn't that. This wasn't even about the treehouse anymore. It was about principle. About control. About what happens when someone's fantasy of power hits the wall of a man who just wants to live his damn life in peace. I didn't know how far she'd go. I didn't yet know she'd fake a citation. That she'd file an emergency board motion without quorum. That she'd drag me into a courtroom over a hammock and a handmade ladder. I didn't yet know I'd have to bring trail cam footage into evidence, or that a county ranger would end up siding with me in front of a live-streamed HOA disciplinary hearing. All I knew was this: she had made a move, and now I had to decide how hard I was willing to play defense. The treehouse was quiet above the lake. The moon was silver. The war had begun. By the next morning, I knew she had filed something. Not because I had been officially notified, but because she made sure to have her goons squad drop a thick envelope at my dock's edge in a plastic sleeve, weighted with a rock and tied up in red yarn like it was cursed. I picked it up with a stick like it might explode, peeled it open on the porch, and found what looked like a rough draft of a lawsuit, stapled together with the kind of gusto only a home office printer can summon. At the top was a typed letter from Barbara Hutchins, president of the Upper Silver Lake HOA, invoking Clause 6C of the Community Guidelines, unauthorized vertical structures obstructing the Unified Recreational View Corridor. I read that 3 times. Then I read it again upside down just in case it made more sense from another angle. My treehouse was now, apparently, an unauthorized vertical structure. That would have been hilarious if she hadn't also added a warning that the board had voted to issue a formal violation and begin proceedings to seek temporary usage rights, pending legal review. I didn't even know HOA boards could do that. Probably because they couldn't. But Barbara wasn't interested in what the bylaws actually allowed, just what she could get away with if she said it loudly enough and printed it on official-looking letterhead. I walked the boundary line again, tracing the markers my brother and I had pounded into the ground a decade ago when we bought this land. I had the original deed tucked into a Ziploc in a fireproof box, the kind you only open for births, deaths, and lawsuits. The treehouse was 35 feet inside my property. It was accessed only from my dock path. No easements. No shared access. No communal claim. But that wasn't stopping Barbara. That afternoon, her guests returned, this time with camping chairs and a Bluetooth karaoke speaker. They set up just outside my tree line, pretending the treehouse was some scenic backdrop for their TikToks. They filmed slow-motion spins with wine tumblers, shouting lyrics from a 2000s pop remix while I sat on the upper deck of the treehouse with a pair of noise-canceling headphones and a bag of sunflower seeds. I wasn't going to give them the show they wanted. Not yet. That evening, I decided to document everything. I set up a trail cam just behind the oak where the path forked. I positioned another on the ridge above the treehouse, aimed at the dock and main trail. I wasn't looking for criminal activity. I just wanted a record. Proof that they were trespassing, that they were trying to use the treehouse as their private resort backdrop. Around sunset, I spotted Barbara in a golf cart, slowly patrolling the edge of the property line like a park ranger in slacks and fury. She had a walkie-talkie. She kept muttering things into it while glancing at my treehouse with the same intensity someone might use if they were trying to will a lightning strike. I watched her pace until she finally parked, took out her clipboard, and started writing. I could only guess what kind of imaginary infractions she was cooking up now. The next morning, a drone buzzed over my deck. I was brushing my teeth on the treehouse balcony when it hovered about 20 feet from my face, just far enough to make filming legal but close enough to make it weird. It was one of those consumer models with a high-def camera, probably controlled from Barbara's porch. I waved at it, then flipped it off, then went back inside and fetched a tennis racket just to see how close it would dare get. It hovered for a while, maybe thinking I'd back down. Then it zipped upward and vanished into the canopy like a mechanical hummingbird sent from hell. That was the final straw. I called the county property assessor's office and asked to confirm the lot lines. Then I called Darnell again. He said he'd stop by, but I could hear the weariness in his voice already. He'd dealt with her before, probably more times than he cared to admit. And the thing about HOA disputes is they're never about what they seem. They start with noise complaints and yard decor and end with restraining orders and emergency town hall meetings. When Darnell showed up, I handed him the binder. Not hers, mine. Mine had trail cam stills. Time-stamped. Photos of her guests blocking the dock path. One of a man attempting to climb the treehouse ladder while holding a beer can in his teeth. He studied the photos, nodded slowly, and said, "Well, damn." I showed him the drone footage next. He exhaled like someone trying not to laugh too loudly, and shook his head. "You got her this time," he said, and I could tell he meant it. But the real win came when the county assessor called back and offered to send a copy of the digital plat map. It showed my property lines as bold as the day we bought the land. The treehouse, dock, and even the hammock zone were well within my boundaries. No dispute. No gray area. Legally and cartographically mine. I could have gone on the offensive right then. I could have filed a cease and desist or demanded a formal HOA apology. But I knew Barbara. She didn't play clean. She didn't believe in losing. That night, I spotted a new flyer pinned to the community bulletin board near the mailboxes. Emergency HOA meeting, Upper Lake Structural Violations Review. No signature. No context. Just the time and place. I pulled it down, took a photo, and started making calls. Turned out half the board hadn't even approved the meeting. Barbara was trying to pull a stunt, something informal that she could use as pretend authority. But when I got there, I found her already holding court under the pavilion, flanked by two of her usual yes-men and an easel that displayed a grainy, zoomed-in image of my treehouse from the drone. "This structure presents a visual obstruction to the lake harmony," she declared. "It was built without community consideration. It disturbs our shared visual experience." I raised my hand like I was back in high school. She tried to ignore me. I stood anyway. "It's not your view to harmonize," I said. "And last I checked, harmony doesn't require binoculars and a restraining order." There were chuckles. Some of the neighbors were clearly getting tired of her crusade. I didn't need them all on my side. Just a few. Just enough to make sure she couldn't claim a majority. I held up my copy of the plat map. I recited the lot number. I pointed out that not only was the treehouse legal, but her guests had been trespassing and documented doing so. "I have the footage," I said. "And I'll gladly bring it to the next county meeting. Along with the drone footage. Which, by the way, violates municipal aerial surveillance codes." That shut her up. For the moment. But the story wasn't done. That night, I found another letter in my mailbox. This one was from a lawyer, hers. Or at least someone pretending to be. It threatened civil action if I continued to obstruct community guests from reasonable shared recreational access. I read it twice, sighed, and poured myself a glass of bourbon. Barbara wasn't just angry now. She was escalating. This wasn't about